Good morning, everyone. Happy New Year. I'm Tabitha Hassell with Tabs on Tap. I hope you guys all had a fantastic New Year's Eve, fantastic New Year's Day, in spite of all of the craziness that's taking place in our country right now. So happy to have you guys join me again this morning. No fancy introduction this morning. I wanted to get right to things because there's so much to talk about. We have Colonel Joe Adams with the Washington Guard joining us at 8 a.m. Cannot wait to talk to Colonel Joe Adams. I know he has a lot to weigh in on when it comes to terrorism and explaining to all of us his perspective. So can't wait to talk to Colonel Joe Adams. There's a lot going on, no question about it. It was a very busy New Year's Day, New Year's Eve, and I don't even know what to say today. It's been a long time since we've had an ISIS terror attack in our country. It's not unexpected. Typically, when these things occur, it is going to be on a holiday. That's, of course, how they get attention. Good morning, Rob. Good morning, Kim. I don't quite think things are as unusual as some people do. And I'm going to get into that. Obviously, we had two big events that took place when it comes to terrorism. And, I'm just going to jump right into that. At some point later, I do want to talk about the weather before we leave the show, just because we do have some impending weather coming our way. I'll talk more about that tomorrow because we've got a lot more important things to talk about today. Good morning, Allison. And again, hope you guys had a good new year. Obviously, two terror attacks that took place in our country, one, of course, at 3:15 a.m. on New Year's Eve, the other taking place around 8 a.m. in Las Vegas. And I'm just going to break those down a little bit. And I want to talk a little bit about some different connections, connecting the dots. Some of it we'll talk to before Colonel Joe Adams joins us. Some of it we'll get to after, because I'm certainly interested in what he has to say. You know, the first thing I'm going to do for you is we've talked about this a lot. I've been in radio, I've been in broadcasting for a very long time, and I had a show back in the day on 1380 a.m. and I was on the morning show, the morning drive, with a couple of guys. But on Sundays, I had my own show called Tabs on Tap. And back in 2016, I talked a lot about ISIS terrorism and the connections between, believe it or not, Pakistani ISIS members in Beaumont, Texas, and how they were connected to Hillary Clinton's campaign. Later on in 2019, how they were connected to Joe Biden's campaign. And none of this is any surprise to me. I know a lot of people are going to say, oh, it's a psyops operation. I don't think it is. I think it's radicalization. Radicalization is spreading, not only across the Middle East, it's spreading here in our own country. And I think we've been able to ignore that for quite some time. Good morning, Stacy, Paula, and Karen. And radicalization is something I certainly want to spend a little bit of time talking about, because in the end, that's what it really comes down to. These were both horrific events, and I'm going to get into those specifically. But what it really comes down to is radicalization. And we know, we've talked about it on this show, I've been talking about it for many years. How does radicalization occur? We have mosques here, and there's different types of radicalization. I'm not piling on to the Muslims, but in this case, that's what we're talking about, is that what happens is you have a mosque, and it can be in the Middle East, it could be here in the United States. In this case, in the United States, we have them in different areas. There's New York City, there's Dearborn, Michigan, there's Beaumont, Texas. And if you guys have listened to me for a long time, I've talked a lot about Beaumont, Texas. And the reason why is because Beaumont, Texas is a very radicalized area. You wouldn't think so, but it is. And back in 2016, I remember Hillary Clinton visited Beaumont, Texas. Now, I have to be very careful what I say here, because back when this took place, and back when I had a show that talked about the radicalization in Beaumont, Texas, amongst the Pakistani Muslims in that area that belonged to a certain mosque that was tied to terrorism, one of the leaders of that mosque, somebody that worked for him, started cyber stalking me. And it made me wake up and realize that, yes, I might have this little show in St. Louis, Missouri. At the time, it was a show on Sundays on 1380, but people know what's going on. If you're involved in criminal activity, or if you're involved in terrorism, you keep a good eye on what people know and what people are talking about. And these days, you can track anyone down. It's not difficult to find somebody and find out what they're talking about. And, back in 2016, Hillary Clinton visited Beaumont, Texas. She was part of a fundraiser there. I'm not going to get into who held this fundraiser, but this person was tied to a mosque in Beaumont, Texas. They raised about $400,000 for Hillary Clinton at that time. And again, I'm going to be careful because it was very dangerous the last time I talked about it. I regretted even having that show. I don't want to have a regret again now. But there certainly are some connections, and take that how you want. Is it because the Pakistani Muslims that are radicalized support Democrats? Well, we know the New Orleans terrorist. I'm not even sure if I'm saying this right now. Shamud Din Jabbar, Pakistani. He's Pakistani, and he was, of course, born and raised in Beaumont, Texas. He was connected to the same mosque that that this other person was connected to that did raise funds for Hillary Clinton. I've talked about it many times over the years. Joe Biden connected to the same situation. He also was in Beaumont, Texas in 2019. He also received campaign funds from the same people that are associated to the same mosque. And if you're familiar with foreign politics, Pakistan, there's a lot of terrorism that takes place in Pakistan. And, last year, the year before, there was a lot of FBI reports that talked about the rise in terrorism in Pakistan. And if you guys recall what took place in Afghanistan, a lot of what happened was that people were crossing over the Pakistan border. They were coming into Afghanistan and they became part of the problem. They really infiltrated some parts of the Taliban and parts of the Afghanistan government, and they were a big part of the rise in terrorism in Afghanistan. And it's really unfortunate. And Allison says she also read that Jabbar was reported twice to his army COC for his Islamic extremist view, and they did nothing in fear of causing racial and religious issues. I'm sure that's true. And think about this. It's not unusual for our military members to become radicalized. And now Colonel Joe Adams will probably disagree with me. And I'm not saying it's common. I'm not saying it happens all the time. But what you have to remember is that our special forces train terrorists. I mean, they work alongside terrorists. And if you know anything about, of course, our foreign policy, what you'll know, and you should know, because I talk about it all the time, is how we, the United States government, work hand in hand with terror groups. Now, ISIS is a little bit different. And I think, in my opinion, that's why we saw these particular attacks take place. And because our strategy in regards to terrorism has changed. Under Obama, we had Project Timber Sycamore. And in that particular military operation, which I've talked about again many times, we, the United States, we used our special forces to train al-Nusra. Well, al-Nusra is the same as Al-Qaeda. That's just the name they call it in Syria. And therefore, in Syria, we trained al-Nusra. Al-Nusra, ISIS, they technically are against each other, if that makes sense. However, terror members, they will join whatever group is paying the most at that particular moment. So they might be a member of ISIS today, then they'll be a member of Al Qaeda tomorrow, or Taliban next week. They move wherever the money is. These fighters are like mercenaries. They move wherever the money is. So we had Project Timber Sycamore, and that took place in Syria. Oh, that was Obama attempting to oust Assad. And therefore, we had U.S. Special Forces training al-Nusra, al-Qaeda members. It was a failed program, the largest failed program we've ever had, operated by our CIA in this country. A lot of wasted money. And in the end, the terrorists, which Obama referred to as moderate terrorists, they turned against our special forces and chased them out of town. Literally, they had to flee to Turkey to get away from the people that they trained. But then we have other situations where our special forces work hand in hand. Both Jabbar and Matt Leibelsberg, who I will also get into, he is the person that is the driver of the Cybertruck. He is the what we're referring to as the Cybertruck bomber, Matt Leibelsberger. And he came from Colorado Springs, Colorado. And he and Jabbar were stationed at the same military base in Afghanistan. So we can't say that they definitely knew each other, but it appears that they did. And again, it doesn't seem as strange to me because I see how the radicalization occurs. Here are these two guys, and you have Jabbar, who was born and raised in Beaumont, Texas. He was part of a Pakistani mosque that had already been radicalized, whose imam had been fired because he talked about the growing radicalization that was taking place in his mosque, the same mosque again connected to Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden, and later connected to them. And you have these American troops stationed together, not only with each other, but they're stationed in training and getting to know these various terrorists. Because obviously, it's so crazy. It's a crazy situation to think about that our special forces, a lot of our military in Iraq, it's so weird because we just talked about this. Remember, what was it on Tuesday, Monday or Tuesday? In Iraq, they fought against Al Qaeda. Remember that? We fought against Al Qaeda. Al Qaeda was responsible for killing a lot of our American troops. In fact, we lost around almost 4,500 troops in Iraq. And then we turn around in Syria and we tell our military, hey, we're going to train, we're going to fight alongside Al Qaeda, and we're going to have two objectives. We're going to oust Assad, but we're also going to fight ISIS. And that's where ISIS comes into play. Because ISIS, of course, they wanted to establish their caliphate, their Islamic caliphate in Syria. Most of us have known that for a long time. Well, we, the Americans, got involved under Obama. And Obama said, okay, well, we're going to have two objectives here. One is we're going to support Al Qaeda. We're going to let Al Qaeda run Syria. We're going to oust Assad. We're going to put ISIS in their place. We're going to run them up north into Turkey, up into the northeast region. And then we're going to make sure we control through Al Qaeda the oil fields and all of the other resources in Syria. Well, that plan did not work out. It backfired heavily and at a very heavy loss, for us Americans. And Assad remained in power. ISIS was forced up, of course, into Turkey and up in that northeast region. However, Trump ended the program. Assad was allowed to remain in power without any impedance at all from the United States. Well, then, of course, Joe Biden, comes back into the ring. And what does Joe Biden do? The first thing he does is he starts training Al Qaeda once again in Syria. He goes back to that old objective of ousting Assad and fighting ISIS. Israel, they get into the mix once Assad steps down. And once Assad steps down, guess what? Guess what Israel does? They're not bombing al Nusra, who is also Al Qaeda, now, who, of course, the media calls HTS. They're bombing ISIS. So ISIS is upset because they thought, okay, well, this was supposed to be our Islamic caliphate in Syria. We have fought very hard to take over in Syria. And now all of a sudden, you've ousted Assad and you let Al Qaeda into the mix. Now they're running the show. And we, ISIS, we don't have a home anymore. We no longer have our objective for our caliphate. So clearly they're upset. It doesn't surprise me that ISIS attacks will step up, have stepped up. And quite honestly, it doesn't surprise me that we might have military members that become radicalized. I don't think it's often. I don't think the number is high, but it's certainly not unheard of. And you also have to remember when it comes to terror groups, the designation terror group is very subjective to who you are and what country you live in. And when you have some of our military members, in these Middle Eastern countries, and again, they're living side by side, training side by side with various members of terror organizations, it's not unbelievable to think that they could become radicalized. And, we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Paula says it's not Biden that did this, he signed off on it. but someone else has been pulling the strings. Joe Biden doesn't know what day it is. Oh, Paul, you're absolutely right. The Wall Street Journal, wrote an article about that, which we talked about. I don't know, this week, last week, and it's his senior advisors who are calling the show. Now, who are his senior advisors? We don't exactly know. We assume it's going to be Obama. Biden's following the Biden administration's following a lot of Obama objectives. But think about this. I'm going to play you this video of Jabbar, and most of you have already seen this. Some of you maybe haven't, but this just goes to show he seems like a very normal guy. If you met him, if you went to his real estate company, you wouldn't even know. You would probably have no idea that this guy is a card carrying member of ISIS. But I'll tell you what, the first thing I saw when I saw that white truck and I saw that black flag wrapped up, I zoomed in, I looked at it really good, and I thought, oh, that's an ISIS flag. Because I've studied terrorism for years, and ISIS in particular, I knew exactly what that was, as did so many other people. And what's interesting is that they attempted to, in my opinion, they attempted to cover it up. They tied the flag up. That flag was not tied up. When Jabbar drove through that crowd on Bourbon Street, that flag was flying free. There's video of it, there's photos of it. It was not tied up. They did that later. They tied it up. And, people are I've seen a lot of reports out there. People are saying, well, that, when you see Jabbar's body laying there in the street, I'm not sure if you've seen those photos or not. I did share it on my Telegram page. Well, it is actually him, because the upper level of the entire length of Bourbon Street, people live there. There's apartments, there's hotel rooms, and none of the investigators closed those areas off. So there were people up there taking video, taking photos the entire time. It's hard to find that on social media, but if you go into Telegram, you will see all those photos and all those videos. So I'm trying to rush through this because I know Colonel Joe Adams is going to be joining us in just a couple moments, but I want to show you exactly how normal a terrorist can look and why you can't look around you and let's say a coworker or a friend, you just don't know. I'm gonna show you. I'm not sure if I'm gonna play the whole thing, but I'll play a part of it.
Good evening. I'm Shamsuddin Jabbar, property manager with Blue Meadow Properties and team lead at the Midas Group at Core Realty. I just want to say hello and let you know a little bit about me. So I'm born and raised in Beaumont, Texas, and now live in Houston. And I've been here all my life, with the exception of traveling for the military, where I spent 10 years as a human resources specialist and IT specialist, where I learned the meaning of great service and what it means to be responsive and take everything seriously, dotting I's and crossing T's to make sure that things go off.
Okay, so I just wanted to play just a clip of that, just so you could see. Jabbar seems like just your normal guy. He speaks American. You would never know. You would never know this man was involved with ISIS, yet he is. And there was no, I can't say that his radicalism was hidden, because it wasn't. There were people who knew that he was radical. And I'll tell you what, I'm not saying all Pakistanis in Beaumont, Texas are radical, but I will tell you that the radicalization in that area has been growing exponentially. I talked about it in 2016, and think where it's come now from there. And that's what happens is there are terror recruiters. They spread out all across the country and they center themselves in these mosques, and they do radicalize other people. We have Matt Leibelsberger, who is again the alleged, I don't think it's been 100% confirmed yet, he is the alleged Cybertruck bomber. Now, what I'm interested in knowing, and I hope Colonel Joe Adams can weigh in on this part when he joins us here in just a couple minutes, is, you know what? Yes, you're right. He is a terrorist, according to who? And you're absolutely correct. It does, and I kind of just talked about that, is that terrorism is very subjective depending on who you are and what your goals are. So a lot of people think we, the Americans, are the terrorists. So we've got to be careful with the terrorist label. ISIS, though, I think we're pretty safe to say, certainly terrorists to us here in the United States, unless we're paying them. There's been times where we paid ISIS, and then, of course, we didn't see these terror attacks. But Matt Leibelsberger from Colorado, he is the alleged Cybertruck bomber. He special forces, fantastic military career. You can go in and look at that. If we have time later, we'll jump into that. But what I want to know, and I hope Colonel Joe Adams can potentially answer this question for us. I mean, for the most part, this was a failed attempt. Yes, Jabbar, rammed a group of people on New Year's Eve, a very busy night, which all nights I think in on Bourbon Street are pretty busy nights. 3:15 a.m. I kind of wonder what the objective was here, because yes, he killed 15 people, 39 are hospitalized, some of them with very critical injuries who may also end up, unfortunately, passing away. Innocent people enjoying their New Year's Eve, plowed down by an ISIS supporter in a pickup truck that he rented. That's, of course, what connects. There's two things that connect Al Jabbar, or Jabbar, sorry, with Leibelsberger. They served at the same military base in Afghanistan. They both rented their vehicles from Toro, which is one of those groups where if you as a person want to rent your car out, you put your car on Toro and then anyone can rent your vehicle. Now, the only other thing I'm going to note before Colonel Joe Adams joins us is that Jabbar was staying at an Airbnb in Louisiana, not far from Bourbon Street. And what's interesting is he burned that house down when he left. And of course, police didn't realize till later that the two were connected. But when he stayed at this Airbnb, he burned it down. But the most confusing part to me is that he had IEDs. Four other people related to this case, one woman and three men, had IEDs. The Cybertruck with Matt Leibelsberg, this is a special forces guy. He certainly knows his way around explosives and IEDs or other types of explosives. But I'll tell you what, he loaded a Cybertruck full of accelerants and and fireworks mortars. It doesn't make sense to me. None of the failed part makes sense to me, because these people should be really good with explosives. And in Virginia, of course, we had the house in Virginia that was raided. They found the 150 IEDs. Oh no, pipe bombs. 150 pipe bombs, all loaded into a vest. I didn't realize they were loaded into a vest until this morning. Well, we're going to be joined by Colonel Joe Adams with the Washington Guard. A lot to talk about today. We're going to talk to him, get his input, and then we're going to talk about it a little bit more. And let's see here. Colonel Joe Adams. We make sure he's waiting in the wings. And let's see here. He's not there yet, but he will be joining us here momentarily. He probably had to run and take a call, but we will be joined by Colonel Joe Adams in just a moment with the Washington Guard. And what I don't understand again is that Matt Leibelsberg with the Cybertruck in Las Vegas at the Trump International Hotel. What I don't understand is why that wasn't a successful attempt. Why did he load it with fireworks mortars and accelerant? Why wouldn't he, which can be, if you've ever seen a home or a fireworks warehouse explode, that can be a very serious fire. Now, Elon Musk, of course, says, well, it's a Cybertruck, and with a Cybertruck, the explosion went up instead of out. Now, had it gone out, it may have caused more damage. It did kill him. It injured, I believe, 7 people who were standing in the vicinity, but by no means did it have the effect that I would think that he wanted. And here we go with Colonel Joe Adams. We'll give him a moment to get settled in. But then we have the explosives that took place in New Orleans. Why wasn't that successful? Why did those not detonate? Because their plan was, of course, to ram their truck down Bourbon Street, run over as many people as they could. He aimed for people, and then they were supposed to have a series of explosions, but that didn't happen. And I don't know why that didn't happen. All right, Colonel Joe Adams looks like he is ready to come on and join us. Good morning, Colonel Joe Adams. Happy New Year. So happy to have you with us here this morning.
Yeah, Happy New Year didn't last very long, did it?
No. Set us off for quite the bad tone, didn't it?
Yeah, that's part of their plan. To understand what's going on, people have to understand terrorism. Terrorism is nothing more than guerrilla warfare. Person area that was trained in uh, but to understand where we're at today and where we're going, you have to understand how it started. Actually, this started back in 1979 during the hostage situation in Iran. Then after that happened, they got a group of people together, and the original Delta Force was actually called Project Blue Light, and that's a blue light hat. Blue light was so secretive on our training that once you joined Blue Light, was recruited, that you could never speak the name out loud again. You could never mention a part of who you worked for and what you were doing. And then eventually, in fact, you can check this on the internet. I have, and some say that we never existed, which was false. I'm sitting there evidence of it, and the fact that eventually, and then Delta Force came out of Blue Light, and the person in charge of that was a guy named Colonel Beckwith. So look him up, and he's the one who revolutionized, but actually started the anti-terrorist teams here in the United States, because we knew then, because I had met with one of the Joint Chiefs, we knew then what was coming. So terrorism is a tactic used by people who are outnumbered, they're undergunned. They don't have the facilities or logistics to confront a conventional war, and so they result in terrorism. Somebody once said a terrorist is, depending what side you're on, a terrorist is another person's freedom fighter. And so I declared war on Islam years ago, but because of political correctness, our government's never declared war. Islam is at war with us, and this is going to continue. Now, it's obviously why they did it on January the 1st. That was a wake-up call, okay, to them, that you're vulnerable. Now, terrorism, actually, guerrilla warfare is what this is. People, it's in the form of terrorism. So you have to understand this. I'll tell you how far this goes back. In 1980, I was asked by a friend who ends up being the #1 helicopter instructor for the Army for combat helicopters, asked me to do a speaking engagement at a military academy where his father was an instructor, a teacher. And so I did, and I opened, this is 1980. I opened my speech to about 1,100 cadets, and I said, gentlemen, today I'm going to introduce you to a new word that you have no concept. It is not a part of the vocabulary. And this is how I started my speech in 1980. The new word I'm going to introduce you to is terrorism. And nobody had a clue what I was talking about. And I started talking about the future of terrorism in this country. Terrorism in 1980 wasn't even a part of the vocabulary of Americans. But that's how far I go back. So, and that's important. I'm going to point out, I've been in the intelligence industry for 54 years. I talk to people who will talk to nobody else. And if some of the Guard people are listening in today, think about if you were at the meeting where I spoke, and this is far-fetched, okay? Welcome to my world. Months ago, I said to the Guard, anytime you see a Texas plate in the area, make a note of it and send it to me, and we'll put it on file. Now, why did I say that? Because I've always ahead of the curve. I knew a threat was coming out of Texas then, and so did the FBI. And to show you, I was at Eagle Pass. Now, that truck was spotted with a different driver in Eagle Pass. Now, why would a truck be in Eagle Pass and now up there in New Orleans? Well, whoever had that truck down at Eagle Pass were involved in trafficking people across the border. So now,
Good question.
they're trying to link the Las Vegas situation with New Orleans, correct? All right.
That is correct.
Well, think about this. If that cell operating struck in New Orleans and the cell that pulled that ingenious attack in Vegas, psychological attack, what if they're not the same cell? What if there's no connection to New Orleans to Vegas? Is that more dangerous or is that less dangerous?
Well, you're right. And Colonel Adams, I want to ask you about something.
And I think
I want to add something, if I can, and ask you about how you feel about this. Is now the connection between those two, right as of right now, is that Jabbar and Leibelsberger, Matt Leibelsberger, being the alleged Cybertruck bomber, he is the person who was killed inside the Cybertruck. They were stationed together in Afghanistan at the same base. So that's the connection between those two, outside of renting the vehicle. And of course that, as you said, that electric vehicle that had been rented was in Mexico. It came across the border. Something that I want to talk to you about, though, is radicalization right here in our own country. Because a lot of people think, oh, terrorism, that's people that are coming across our border. What people don't understand, and specific to Beaumont, Texas, as just an example, we've talked on this show before how we have ISIS, literally ISIS, in Mexico across our southern border, training cartel members. We also, who eventually do come here into our country, we know that ISIS, this is such a very serious threat. ISIS has purchased weapons on the black market or directly from Ukraine. Weapons we send to Ukraine end up in the hands of ISIS. We already know this. They make their way into our country. We already know this. And so radicalization in our own country here in the United States, it starts with one mosque. In Beaumont, Texas, as just an example, what they do is they have the radicalization begins from within, and then just like Jabbar, who lives in North Texas now, what they do is they start moving in around a mosque. They take over one block at a time, where soon they own an entire area around that mosque. That becomes your no-go zone. And then from there, the radicalization continues to spread outward. And when you end up with all of this radicalization in different cities around the United States, Columbia, Missouri, Dearborn, Michigan, New York City, we have a lot to worry about with terrorists just right here in our own country. They don't have to be foreign terrorists.
Well, that's part of the strategy of terrorism. Terrorism means inflicting terror into your enemy's camp. That's all. This is very, very simple, but it's the other thing is, these soft targets. America's a soft target, and they talked about the big threat to like the Superdome last night or tonight, and in the future is not the people that enter and go through the process of security to get into the events. It's the people outside. They're unprotected. So terrorism works. Mao Zedong followed Sun Tzu's Art of War about guerrilla warfare. Guerrilla warfare is terrorism, and terrorism is guerrilla warfare. Islam is at war with us. This is not going to stop. I mean, as much as I dislike the FBI director right now, he warned us months ago. This is imminent. It's going to happen. And that's the only good thing he's ever said in those congressional hearings. It's going to happen. The FBI knew this was going to happen. Now, but here's where New Orleans screwed up. The average police officer is not trained in anti-terrorist tactics, okay? Because the anti-terrorist tactic is very, very brutal and cruel, okay? Anti-terrorism anti-terrorism is very, very difficult. I was one of the very few people in this country trained with anti-terrorism. And when I was with Blue Light, and then I morphed into, of course, the Delta Force. So I knew about this decades ago, and I knew this was coming. Now, how did we know it was coming? Even when I met with the Joint Chief, I asked him why all this Middle Eastern training we're doing right now. I mean, all this desert training we're doing, we're going to the Mid East. Why? Oil. So this was inevitable. This was going to happen. But the people, here's how this is going to function. When they run out of soft targets, and psychologically, We'll never run out of soft targets. So when these people decide, oh, America's got it figured out, we're hitting all these soft targets outside these facilities. And like I said to my wife this morning, what if I walked in, or somebody, not me, somebody walked in Walmart today with they sell fireworks in this country, and they're called quarter sticks of dynamite. It's the same sound as a quarter stick of dynamite. Right now, if somebody walked in Walmart and set one of those off, a firecracker, but it sounds like a quarter stick of dynamite. Can you imagine the panic? Because these terrorists have planted that seed already. If you heard that explosion, it would be man. What they're going to do is not only hit soft targets in these major cities, but they're going to go to urban warfare.
That's
And
what concerns me most, Colonel Adams, is the urban warfare. I thought about that this morning when I was up and getting ready for the show, as I thought, we know there's more coming. This is just the beginning. It wasn't a one-time isolated incident. There will be many more, particularly because of our changing policy in Syria, against ISIS. And we're certainly going to have more attacks. But what will those attacks look like? It's not necessarily going to be at a big stadium or a truck driving down through a very crowded street. It could be at your local Walmart. It could be you getting out of your vehicle, going into the store. We know what ISIS is capable of, and they have had in the past isolated incidents where they will attack just a random person. We see it happening all the time, over, of course, in the UK, and it has happened here in the United States as well. But, you don't see those incidents on the news quite as much as you do a mass event.
No, I mean, let's face it. If they came to Washington, Missouri, and even if it set off a smoke bomb in Walmart today, people would go crazy, and that's what they want. They have to terrorize and put fear into the American public, which is part of the reason I'm here in Washington and organize the Washington Guard. We've got a meeting today here at my house of the FOROPS teams, Forward Operations Team, and that's our military branch of my militia here in Washington. And just a coincidence, we already had it scheduled anyway, and we addressed those issues. I mean, we are at war with the terrorists, but Islam is behind this, and they're at war with us. And because of political correctness, the people in charge of this country aren't identifying the issues and won't be for political correctness.
Well, they won't because they're taking money from them. Before you came on, Colonel Adams, I don't know if you were listening, but at that time, but I know for a fact that both Hillary Clinton in 2016 and Joe Biden in 2019, they took very considerable campaign contributions, Hillary Clinton, $400,000 from the same mosque in Beaumont, Texas, that is tied to Jabbar, who is a radicalized mosque. And, that's a very radicalized town, quite honestly. The same Pakistani Islamic mosque in Beaumont, Texas, hosted these fundraisers for both Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton. Of course, they're not going to do anything about it.
No. And we allow it to happen. A mosque are nothing but a center of Islam's, what can I say, preparation to try and take over this country. And there's nothing, and we allow it. We allow these people to have facilities and organizations to plan and plot against America. That has to stop. Now, coincidentally, I belong to a think tank called Phoenix 13. And our main objective is what we do, we study and predict the threats of Islam to America. Now, some people don't like that. In fact, when I first moved out here to Washington, we had a worthless police chief in charge of the police department. And he told his police officers that Joe Adams has Islamophobia. Really? I think first for it's a false fear or whatever. First of all, there's no fear in me about Islam. I understand them. So he actually said that. Well, I wonder what he's thinking today. And I met with him. And I said, look, Islam down the road, their objective is to destroy America. Well, that's Islamophobia. I said, that's just because you don't understand. You're a small town police chief, never been anywhere, never done anything. I'm telling you, I've been in this business back then like 51 years, and I'm telling you, it's a threat. Now, are we aggressive on that? No, because we have laws. But someday, we will go to war with Islam in this country, and it's already started.
It's closer than people think. It is so much closer than people think. Colonel Adams, one question I want to ask you, and I was also, talking about this before you joined us this morning, that a lot of people have messaged me and said, "Oh, this is just a big psyops. There is no way that two members of our military would ever join ISIS or be part of a terror attack." And I disagree, because when you're stationed, let's say these two, Jabbar and Leibelsberger, stationed together in Afghanistan, and you're working side by side with ISIS or Al Qaeda, whoever it is the United States might be funding and training at that time, you also can become radicalized. I'm just curious what you think about that.
I lost you there for.
Oh, yeah, I
Start out
lost you
talking about.
for just a second too. Well, I was just asking you what you thought about American troops becoming radicalized. It's not unheard of.
Are you back?
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
Yeah, I was
Where
just
did
asking
you,
you about what you think about American troops becoming radicalized. I'm not saying it happens all the time, but I think it happens more often than people think.
oh, no. People have to understand this. Do you know how long cells can lay quietly? I mean, there's cells in this country that have been organized 30 years ago, waiting to be activated, and everybody in the FBI knows that different groups have joined the military to become citizens who hate us. The cartel has sent people to join the military up here, first of all, to acquire knowledge of our knowledge. We have active cells in our military, which shouldn't be there. And they do it, and then they become citizens. If you serve a year in the military here in this country, and you're an alien, you go to the front of the line for citizenship. This is all a long range plan. This has been going on for decades, and now it's starting to surface. I mean, we've already forgot about 9/11, which was the biggest one ever. Now they've resorted to guerrilla warfare, and so it's understandable. They're going to terrorize people, and that's what they're after.
There's no question about it. I know I feel terrorized this morning. I'm always leery of going to big events, big crowded places, because I know there's always a risk of terrorism, because and I know there's always somebody out there watching and waiting. Somebody always has a plan. Now, when they're called into action, why they're called into action, we don't always know. But I think that we can see that, we're getting ready to go through a big change in foreign policy, because we're going to be switching from Democrats. I don't know about Matt Leibelsberger in Las Vegas. I'm not sure of his political affiliation. I know for a fact that Jabbar not only was a Democrat, but donated to the Democrats. He donated to Act Blue. He was a registered Democrat voter. And a lot of people don't want to see policy change, what happens in the Middle East in particular, because we know Trump is absolutely not going to follow Obama's plan. There's no way. We know that Joe Biden's not calling any shots. We know that it's most likely Obama and the rest of the cabal behind the scenes. And I think that lends also to some of the terror attack situations.
Well, yeah, I mean, Joe Biden's not in charge. Now they're going to meet with him. He just came off his last vacation. What was it total? What was it? 13.6. Oh yeah, check this out. I know this is not related, but it kind of is. So Joe Biden, what's he do in his last 30 days? He goes on vacation, right? Do you know what that vacation cost the taxpayers? At least $13.6 million.
Crazy.
And that's not including support mechanisms by the Air Force in flying for protection on our jets. This is just the personal expenses from the White House. $13.6 million so he could go to St. Croix, with his son on Air Force One.
Pretty funny, isn't it? And and Colonel Adams, you and I both know, our listeners know, no one does anything or says anything about it. Why? Because Democrats aren't going to call it out. And you know what? Neither are Republicans. The Republicans we have sitting in Congress are sad, except for maybe a couple of them. It's a pretty sad situation. We've got to wipe the slate clean. I don't think Republicans in Congress are any more of use to us than Democrats are. No one's going to call him out. If it were Trump, of course, it would be all over the news, top headlines that, oh, Trump went and played golf. Oh, he spent money. He's spending your taxpayer money. But when it's Biden, nobody cares. Nobody says anything.
Yeah. 13.6 million. That's a minimum.
It's a nice
probably another million. Oh yeah, for protective service by the Air Force, everything. I mean, yeah. Here's his legacy. Last 30 days during transition, he goes on vacation and spends almost $14 million. Probably could be more than that. So thank you, Mr. President. That's your legacy, you and your family.
Anyway, it's terrible. Absolutely terrible. Well, Colonel Adams, do you have anything else to add to the terrorism situation? Anything you think is important for people to know moving forward? Because we do expect, the FBI does expect additional terror attacks to occur. We don't know where, we don't know when, but they said that it's certainly on the agenda.
We don't know where and we don't know when. Now, the FBI knows more than they're talking about. We don't know where, we don't know when. That's part of the plan. That's upsetting.
Yes.
It doesn't upset me because I know it was coming for a long time and we're quite prepared. And it's part of the training. When I say, the Washington Guard militia trains people to be on their own, those people in that street last night was on their own. Oh, one thing. Here's where the New Orleans screwed up. Now, when you have police officers who are become complacent and it's just another day on the job, and they've got all the barricades set up and all that, here's where they messed up. And this is where I used to come in. I would go in sterile to a situation that I have no idea. I don't know the streets, anything. And a professional anti-terrorist like myself, a security expert, would go in and say, oh, you've got a punch hole, you got a hole here, you got to correct this, correct that. Now, there's no way a person like myself that's trained would go down there and try and critique that place and say, oh, by the way, can't they drive a truck around the barricade? Excuse me? I mean, the terrorists that pulled that off had to be laughing at us. Thank you. They gave us an avenue. I mean, so, and by the way, that police chief down there, where did they get her? Where did they get her at? At a craft show? I mean, that's a joke.
Yeah, speaking of that, look at the FBI, captain or whatever you want to call her, leader in that area. What is her name? Duncan, who said this is not an act of terrorism. The guy had an ISIS flag.
Sorry about training. What's that? Oh, no. I'm going to tell you how far I go back. If they would have hired a person like myself to go down there, they would have pointed those things out. They didn't do it. They become complacent. That police chief's disconnected. In the 80s, I got hired by OPPTU, Ontario Police Tactical Unit. I went to Canada to infiltrate a nuclear facilities as a terrorist. So I got to be a terrorist, loved it. And don't you know, I was able to penetrate their facilities, their security, got to a level in the nuclear plant where they would have had to negotiate with me. They need to have brought somebody in there, and I'm sure other cities now are looking at this. These people are not 24-hour anti-terrorists. They're police officers. They're politicians. But that police chief, she's a joke. I mean, she looks like my sophomore English teacher, Mrs. Bennett. I mean, just come on, no.
Colonel Adams, how did Jabbar know? How did the terror group know? It's not just Jabbar, it's a terror group. How did they know there would be no surveillance cameras on Bourbon Street that night? There was construction taking place. All the security cameras were turned off. You have to believe that they knew that ahead of time.
No, they didn't. No.
You think it was just happenstance?
Yeah, this is a one-way mission. Who gives a damn? No, they didn't. No, that's just more incompetence. This is all about incompetence by the administration in New Orleans, how to orchestrate and do this public safety. Now, so in terrorism, what they should do is not have the football game tonight, right? But that plays into the terrorist act, and there's a money issue. They're going to convince them now if they have another pending attack down there tonight during that football game, they're in deep trouble. So they're risking a lot. But if you cancel an event, aren't you playing into the terrorists? So the
Yes.
terrorists are in control of this. We have no control. No control. The
We don't.
terrorists are in charge. Anyway, you have a good day, people. And good morning, Allison. Miss you. See you at the next gun show. And Cindy and who else? Oh, Sherry. Keep in there, Sherry. Guys, thanks for having me. I'll see you next week, and unless somebody blows me up. So anyway, be aware, join the guard, pay attention, take that second look. If you feel uncomfortable, get out of there. We are under attack, and we got to live with it. Good day.
That we do. Thank you so much, Colonel Joe Adams. Happy New Year again to you. Thank you for joining us this morning. And that was Colonel Joe Adams with the Washington Guard. You can reach out to Colonel Joe Adams at the Washington Guard at washingtonguard.com. Go out, check them out. As you can see, man, Colonel Joe Adams, he knows his stuff. He's been around the block a few times, and he's got a lot of good information for us. I'm very happy to have had him weigh in today to talk about terrorism and what terrorism is, because while these terrible incidents have happened, particularly the incident in New Orleans, we had a terrorist, literally an ISIS terrorist, carrying the ISIS flag, speeding through Bourbon Street as quickly as he possibly could, aiming for people. He ran over a man in a wheelchair. It's horrific. Of course it is. But the bigger issue is terrorism in general, understanding terrorism, understanding radicalization and how these things happen and why they happen. Because, we can't count on our FBI or our police officers to stop terrorism. They're there to pick up the pieces after the terror attack has already gone. Now, of course, the FBI and a lot of other wonderful branches of our law enforcement have foiled plenty of terror attacks that could have taken place in our country. We know that every year there's a number of attacks that they do end up finding out about. They hear the chatter. We never even know that there was a potential terror attack that they stopped in its tracks, yet it happens every single year. This one, I don't know how this one slipped through. They didn't seem very well organized. Like I said earlier before Colonel Joe Adams joined us, they had explosive devices. They didn't go off. Their plan in New Orleans was to ram that truck all the way down through the middle of Bourbon Street, hit as many people as they possibly could, and then detonate the truck. And then the other IED explosives were supposed to go off and cause more carnage. That didn't happen. It didn't happen. Why it didn't happen, I don't know. Was it faulty? Why was this truck over in Mexico? Why did it come across the border, just 2 days prior? Were they loading it with explosives? Were they the people who made the explosives and put them into the truck? I don't know. Obviously the truck was rented out of Texas, not out of Mexico. So there's still a lot to be learned. And even more so, look at the what would be bombing in the Trump International Hotel in Las Vegas, where we had Matt Leibelsberger is of course, the alleged Cybertruck bomber there. It wasn't very effective. I don't know what his goal was. I would certainly think in special forces, he would have a little bit more of a better understanding of explosives and how they work. Of course, using a Cybertruck was a big message, of course, to Donald Trump and Elon Musk. No question about that. I've actually stayed at that hotel before, there at the Trump International Hotel in Las Vegas. It's a beautiful, absolutely beautiful building. And right there where the lobby is, you walk in right there, and there's actually a little water station where you can get some, I think it's like cucumber, mint, something like that, water, right there once you walk into the door. It's a beautiful place. And I'm not surprised that they chose that particular hotel or that they used a Cybertruck, but whatever their goal was not effective. It did not even crack the windows or the door right where the truck left. And I don't know about you guys, but when I originally saw on video, the Cybertruck fire, quite honestly, I really didn't think too much about it. I heard what was very obvious fireworks going off, and I thought, well, that's strange. Did somebody get out of their vehicle? And maybe, it's not terribly unusual to think that somebody might have had fireworks. It's New Year's, New Year's Eve the night before. Maybe they plan on setting off some fireworks and they're in their vehicle. Maybe they drop a cigarette and then the fireworks set off. And you've seen those accidental fires that take place in people's garages or their homes, or a fireworks stand where it explodes, and it's a very crazy scenario when that takes place. So it's not unusual to think, well, maybe it was just an accident. But now that we know that Matt Leibelsberger and Jabbar, they were stationed at the same base in Afghanistan. They may have very well known each other. They both rented their vehicles from the same company called Toro. And, and the reason, it's kind of funny because I just read an article about Toro 2 days ago. I was reading this, had absolutely nothing to do with this, but, Toro is, and that's why Colonel Joe Adams, wouldn't be too far off base thinking that these are different terror cells and they're not related. Maybe Jabbar and Leibelsberger didn't know each other at all, because Toro is used by criminals all the time. All the time. I just read an article about it the other day where when you rent a vehicle from Toro, you have to show them a driver's license, you have to show proof of insurance, but you're doing all of this online. And it is fairly easy to fake a driver's license and send that online. And these people at Toro, they're not running it through the FBI. They don't know who you are. And they think, okay, well, that looks good. And off you go, with your vehicle. And they've had a lot of problems. I was just reading a story about a Tesla that was stolen from an owner who had rented his car on Toro. This person presented a fake driver's license, took his Tesla. First thing they did was take it to a body shop in another area and had that car dismantled immediately. And he never saw his car again. There was another incident where a homicide was committed, where it was a woman who rented a vehicle and from Toro, and she submitted her driver's license. And while they looked her driver's license over and it looked legit, after the fact, when they found out what the vehicle was actually used for, well, then they realized, oh, while the driver's license picture is her, under sex, it says male, not female. So they didn't catch that in the beginning. They didn't see it till later. So I think that these companies like Toro who rent vehicles, they need to be a little bit more careful. They need to have a better plan in place. Now, they do track their vehicles, but, if you're the right person, there's a tracker on the car, pretty easy to remove that tracking system. And in this case, the owner, now Toro doesn't own the vehicle, it would be an individual. So both for the Cybertruck and the electric Ford F-150, we don't know who the owner is. Now, I know that media has spoken to both of the owners. I've read the comments. I didn't see a name. And did these people track their vehicles? Did they trust the licenses sent into them? In this case, Jabbar probably used his own driver's license. Leibelsberger probably used his own driver's license. They both plan to die in the attack. They both probably think they're martyrs in the name of ISIS, so they very well may have used their own ID. And I think it's interesting that in Jabbar's case, that he rented that Airbnb on Mandeville Street, which isn't really terribly far from Bourbon Street, and he burned the house down. After he rented the house I think he was there for a night, he burned the house down. And they didn't, of course, connect that until later. I don't think anything I see is a psyop. I've looked at it. I've been kind of trying to do as much research as I can. If there's any psyop that would be in play here, it would be that, and I'm making a far stretch here, it would be that Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden both are connected to Beaumont, Texas. They are. I talked about this in more depth a little bit at the beginning of the show, but in 2016, Hillary Clinton visited Beaumont, Texas. She visited a specific business owner. I'm not going to say his name. I made that mistake in the past, and one of his associates cyber stalked me and scared the daylights out of me, to put it mildly. So therefore, I'm not going to get into that. But she did visit Beaumont, Texas in 2016. There was a person associated with the Pakistani mosque who raised about $400,000 for her in 2016. And in this particular mosque, the imam had been fired for outwardly talking to media about radicalization. He said he did an article with a local paper, and he said, yes, I worry about radicalization because here, in my own mosque, I'm seeing radicalization occur. People come here to our mosque for the first time, and they're here for a while, and all of a sudden they become radicalized. He was trying to fight against radicalization, and he was fired for speaking out about it. And their new imam, I'm not as familiar with, and what their ties are. But then we had Joe Biden, 2019, visiting the same business person and also receiving a very significant campaign donation from the same Pakistani group that is affiliated with the mosque that is tied to radicalization. So you can connect the dots yourself, from there. And the same group had ties to Scalia, which I'll get myself, uh, you know what I mean. So I'm just not going to talk about that. But there's a lot of dots to be connected in these situations. So I can't rule out a psyops based on these connections. I can't rule out that it wasn't known or planned or certain people weren't involved. But at the same time, I don't think it's terribly unusual to see that we have American soldiers, American military members who are radicalized. Now, of course, Jabbar would have been radicalized prior to joining the military, but that's exactly what they do. That's part of their initiative. Just like Colonel Adams stated, they join the military with the intent of radicalizing other people. So we could even say potentially Livelsberger may have known Jabbar when they were stationed together in Afghanistan. And it's certainly possible that Jabbar radicalized him and maybe radicalized other soldiers as well. We don't know. We can only guess. Scott says, good morning, Scott. Colonel Adams should write a book, Champion Bodybuilder 2. He should write a book. No question about it. And I love hearing his stories. He's got so much to say. And I was very happy to have him join us this morning and kind of weigh in on everything that's taken place. And there's still a lot that, of course, is going to come out of both of these situations. I saw yesterday where they went to the home of Jabbar just in North Houston. And it was kind of interesting. He's an interesting character, to say the least. But I'll tell you what, his interesting character is very much in line with what we see with other extremists. He lived in a trailer. It was a trailer park that was, I would say predominantly, if not all, Pakistani Muslim. And he had live animals in his yard, goats, sheep, chickens. Not that's not unusual. Some of us probably also have the same types of animals, but of course that's also not unusual when it comes to Islam. But that's exactly how these neighborhoods work. They build the mosque, people attend the mosque, they move within the block or so of the mosque, and then they continue to start. This is how terrorism actually began in Syria, believe it or not. And we know now that Syria, of course, extremely radicalized. We have Al Qaeda running the show. Now they call Al Qaeda HTS now, but Al Qaeda, Al Nusra, they're the same people. And I do think our foreign policy has a lot to do, with what's taking place. We have ISIS in Syria wanting to run the show, but here in the United States, we get involved. Israel gets involved, and we take it away from ISIS. We give it to Al Qaeda, the same as Al Nusra. Now that we call them HTS, and terrorism is very subjective, isn't it? Just like Colonel Adams said, like I said before, Colonel Adams joins us, is what Colonel Adams said is one terror group is somebody else's freedom fighter. You look at the Houthis in Yemen. We, the United States and Saudi Arabia, we have bombed the heck out of Yemen. And in doing so, there's been hundreds of thousands of lives lost. There have been lots of lives lost due to famine. And the famine has taken place because we have placed so many sanctions against Yemen. The people there, they can't survive. If you look at videos of Yemen, there's children starving. People have no food. They have no medical care. And the Houthis rose up to fight for their people. So are they a terror group or are they not? It's very subjective what you think. Some people could say the same thing about Hamas or Hezbollah, that those groups rose up to protect their people from oppression that led to loss of lives, to famine, economic disparity, and so on. So it is very objective. Now, ISIS is one group that I will personally say I don't feel that they're freedom fighters. I don't think they're trying to lead to freedom for any group. They are strictly there to cause terror. And they wanted to establish their Islamic caliphate in Syria. We, the United States, got involved, even though Jabbar is a Democrat and supported Democrats, it is also Democrat policy that has led to the changes in Syria, in which we have fought against ISIS and for Al Qaeda. Now, does that have anything to do with what took place here? Why ISIS is once again on the rise? When Obama was president, I always felt that terror attacks went down because Obama brought the Muslim Brotherhood into the White House. And these groups in Beaumont, Texas, this is Pakistani mosque, is tied to the Muslim Brotherhood. So I am sure that Jabbar, being a Pakistani Muslim, born and raised in Beaumont, Texas, attended the same mosque that is radicalized, that gave money to Hillary Clinton and to Joe Biden. None of it surprises me. It comes full circle, doesn't it? Now the question is what's going to happen next? What's going to happen next? Where will the next attack be? Because there will be further attacks. There's no question about it. But what do? Are you going to hide? Are you going to stay home? Are you not going to go anywhere? If you're in the St. Louis area, you're not going to go to any Blues games or Cardinals games. Are you not going to go grocery shopping? Because trust me, terrorism, it can strike anywhere. It can come through your front door. Don't think it can't. And particularly now, one of the things that I think we're going to be facing in the near future is that Trump, of course, rightfully so, wants to conduct mass deportations on day one. And we know it is a fact, whether you believe it or not, it is a fact. ISIS, and I'm not talking about the generalization of terror groups, I'm talking about ISIS. ISIS is on our southern border. They are in Mexico. They are training the cartels in ISIS tactics. We've known this for years. It's not new. And if you guys recall, there's been a lot of talk about how the gangs, the cartels, have become cannibals. I know that sounds crazy. You might think I'm crazy for saying that, but it's true. It is absolutely true. And ISIS taught them that. So, what the cartels do now to create more fear and terror is that they have turned to cannibalism. And it's just a terror tactic. And ISIS has taught them well. And now, of course, a lot of these folks in our country worrying and fearing deportation. And what do you think they're going to do? How desperate are they going to be? Are they going to come to your front door and try to hide out in your home? Are they going to take your car and, while they're fleeing? We just don't know. And it's hard to say, I won't be scared. I won't be fearful, when yet there is a true fear there. And Todd, you asked a fantastic question. How do you trust your Muslim neighbors if you have them? It's sad to discriminate. I have friends that are Muslim, and I will always say and have always said that the majority of Muslims are good people. They absolutely oppose terrorism. They oppose radicalization, and they are just like us. They might happen to be under the faith of Islam, but they also in there's I'm not going to get into Islam right now. We'll save that for another day. But there is a reason and a big difference between the Shiites and the Sunni. Now, the American government always supports the Sunni. ISIS, as a matter of fact, 99% of all terror groups are Sunni. And I'm not saying that all Sunni Muslims are part of the terror groups, but that is where you're going to see your radicalization. Now, the Shiite, which is, of course, the people we typically fight against, the Shiite would be the Houthis, would be Hamas, would be Hezbollah. Those are all Shiite groups. And now some people consider them to be terrorists, but most other countries outside of the United States and Europe consider them to be paramilitary and not terrorists. So it is very subjective. But as far as you in your own neighborhood and St. Louis, there's a lot of Islam in the city of St. Louis. If you live in St. Louis, it's there, and it is something you have to really think about and consider. But overall, the vast majority of Muslims, they're against terrorism, they're against radicalization, just as much as if we are, if not more. Think about that, if not more, because you know who terrorists kill? They kill more Muslims than they do anyone else. They kill their own people. Look at this situation again, Syria as an example, Afghanistan as an example, where you see Sunni terrorism come into play. Well, the terrorism that takes place within the Sunnis is the ultra conservative terrorism. They're held to Sharia law. They have to wear the black burqas. They have to pray, 5 times a day. Well, not all Muslims live that way. And that's what some people don't understand. Not all Muslims live that way. I know plenty of Muslims. I have a good friend that's a Muslim who's an attorney, and he and his wife, she's certainly not running around in a black burqa. That's for sure. He drinks, he goes out, he has fun. He doesn't eat bacon, or pork, but that's about the only thing that separates us all. And but then you see the ultra conservative Muslims, and that's where the radicalization occurs. You see an area like Syria where it goes from everyone's free under government control. The women are wearing their hair down, no head coverings, no black burqas. They're wearing heels and jeans and listening to American music, watching American movies, going to nightclubs. And then you have Al Qaeda, Al Nusra, or ISIS come into play. And the next thing you know, all these women, their rights are taken away. They're wearing black burqas. They're not allowed to leave their home. Look at Afghanistan. In Afghanistan now, and remember when the Taliban said they were the new Taliban? No, we all knew that was a facade. And that's going to be the same thing in Syria. And now women in Afghanistan, it's gotten so bad where they have to black out their windows, because now in Afghanistan, it is illegal for a woman to be seen through the window of her own home. So they have to paint all of their windows black so that women can be in the home and not be seen. That's radicalism. That is where terrorism breeds. And when you see that, even here in the United States, these no-go zones, that's terrorism. That's where terrorism breeds. And unfortunately, we still have areas here in the United States where there are no-go zones. New York, Dearborn, Michigan, Beaumont, Texas. Now, Texas, of course, Governor Greg Abbott, he outlawed Sharia law throughout the entire state of Texas. They haven't done that in Michigan. They haven't done it in New York. They haven't done it in Missouri. There's an area in Columbia, Missouri that, in my opinion, is radicalized. These places it's happening here in our own country. Again, Jabbar, born and raised, Beaumont, Texas. We've talked about Beaumont, Texas for a really long time. If you've listened to me or, on any show I've ever been on, because it is another area of radicalization. And eventually what's going to happen if we don't stop it in its tracks is the radicalized folks, boy, they're gaining ground fast. They're going to continue to radicalize, and you don't know. It's hard to look at somebody. Look at Matt Leibelsberger, from Colorado Springs. If you go out and take a look at his photos, you would never look at him and think that he was radicalized. You would never really, quite honestly, even Jabbar being, from Pakistan, you would still never think of him being radicalized. But the Pakistanis are very quickly becoming the most predominant in radicalization, in Islamic radicalization. And it's pretty scary, quite honestly, to think about it. And here in our country, but you can't fear your neighbors. You can't fear the people in your own community, because most Muslims are good people. You have to get to know someone, unfortunately, before you really have an idea. There was a woman, I don't know if you guys recall, I think it was in Los Angeles, somewhere in California, Bakersfield maybe, where there was a woman who, if you guys can recall, was a mass shooter. And she was radicalized, and she lived in Bakersfield, California, the people who worked with her, they had no idea she was radicalized. They just had no idea. It's really difficult to know, and that's why terrorism is so scary, because you just don't know. You just don't know. And they don't have to have black or brown skin to be radicalized. But there is a lot of radicalization in this country. In Minneapolis, it's the Somalis. In Beaumont, Texas, it's the Pakistanis. In Dearborn, Michigan, it's Middle Easterns. In New York, it is a combination of a little of each. You just don't know. There's a couple of things. If you find out somebody is a Salafi, Salafis are highly, highly radicalized. That would probably, be a little bit of a clue to me. And let's see, our country has become so weak and fragile, the majority live in an emotional state of mind, and it's much easier to control, manipulate people in the emotional state of mind. You're absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. And Todd says there's a guy at my son's high school that drives a van picking up kids. He gets his rug out and prays. Not sure I would want my son on that van. Is that wrong? Or in that van? I'll tell you what, of course it's not wrong. I myself and a friend of mine who's probably not listening to the show, she and I called, you got to be careful with two things. And somebody mentioned it here earlier on the show, is that the majority of our trucking industry, crazy as it sounds, has been taken over, by foreigners, particularly Islam. And you do have to worry. Now, most of these people, again, are good people, but there is a percentage of them that are not good people. And they're out running around in these giant semi trucks that could easily be turned into a weapon. So they're technically always armed with their weapon, just waiting for that call. Don't think that there aren't big truck drivers, semi truck drivers out there who aren't radicalized, because there certainly are. And when it comes to what you just stated, Todd, my friend and I, we went to a Cardinals game, and we called, I don't remember if it was Lyft or Uber, but we one or the other. I think it was Lyft. And this guy came and he picked us up, and we were underneath, if you know where the, of course, Busch Stadium is, there's that area. It's kind of like an overpass under Highway 40. We were parked underneath there, but we were going somewhere else. Then we were going to come back later and get our vehicles. So he picked us up and he said, well, we get in the car, and he's like, oh, wait a minute. I want to show you something. So we're underneath this overpass. I'm like, oh my God, what's this guy going to do? And, we're in a very vulnerable spot. Well, he opens up his trunk and he gets out his Quran, and he calls us back to his trunk. And we both thought, oh my God, we didn't talk about this till later, but at the same time, we were both thinking, man, this guy's going to push us into his trunk and take off, and we'll never be seen again. But he wanted to talk to us about his Quran, and he wanted to talk to us about the Islam faith. And did we understand? Were we for it? Were we against it? It was a really scary thing. That happened right here in St. Louis. And we thought for sure if we said no, we were against it, this guy was going to murder us. So we were like, oh, yeah, we're very familiar with the Quran. We love it. And we were able to get back back to our vehicles and survived another day. But how many won't or wouldn't? Because a lot of these people are definitely driving rideshare vehicles. Trust me on that one. I've had 2 incidents in which I became very fearful in a rideshare. And, that gets into a whole nother topic about some of the sexual assaults that have occurred in rideshares. I think you can see where that path is going, because those certain type of people don't respect females. And if you're in a car, they see you as a very vulnerable target. I've since stopped taking ride shares. I don't do it anymore. I don't take Ubers. I don't take Lyfts. I try to avoid it unless I'm with other people. I will never take one alone ever again. And as a matter of fact, there's a class action lawsuit right now against rideshare companies because of all these sexual assaults that have occurred. And don't think it's not happening. It is happening. But, that being said, I only got a couple minutes left. We'll talk a little bit more about some of this tomorrow, because I'm sure there will be more information that comes out over, tonight. More, hopefully they'll track down some of these other people involved. There are still folks they believed are involved in this terror cell that planned the attacks, not only in Las Vegas, but also in New Orleans. They're working desperately to try to find out what exactly is taking place. They know there is threat of further attacks taking place. They actually expected other attacks to take place last night. There was a mass shooting in New York City and Queens where I believe there were 10 people that were injured. I don't think that's terror related. I think that's just, it's sad to say that these things happen. Look what happened in St. Louis. If you live in the St. Louis area, Wheelhouse over the weekend, they had a fight. It was like 20, I heard anywhere from 25 to 50 people were fighting in the street. I've watched the video a couple of different times, and one of the security officers there ended up firing at a guy because the guy brandished his weapon, shot and killed him. And we live in crazy times right now. What are you fearful for the most? Us Americans who are trying to kill each other, or the terrorists who want to kill us all? There's a lot of fear, to be had. And hopefully with Donald Trump taking office, a lot of that is going to change. It's going to change. We're not ready right now for war. We're in a very vulnerable spot. Our military, while they are fantastic, we're not ready. The Biden administration has weakened our military. What are we going to fight terrorists with? But what I do think is interesting is Joe Biden. Do you remember when he threatened Americans with Hellfire missiles? Do you remember that? When we talked about, keeping our weapons and so on, he said, well, you can do that, but guess what? I have Hellfire missiles behind me. What are your weapons compared to mine? But you don't hear him making those statements to the terrorists, do you? They allow these no-go zones to form. They allow radicalization here in our own country. Look at Russia for an example. They're rounding up. As a matter of fact, in Russia, they don't allow schools to teach in any language but Russian. When you go to school in Russia, you have to speak Russia to learn. If you don't speak Russian, you're not allowed to attend school. If you're in Russia, even legally, and you don't speak Russian, you cannot attend their schools. They're not speaking two different languages to accommodate people who don't speak their language. Russia's getting ready to deport some migrants that are non-Russian speaking who are there right now. And Putin has come out very firmly and said the reason why we don't see, of course, all these terror attacks in Russia is because he's been so firm. He very, very clearly stated to the terrorists, hey, if you come to Russia and you commit a terror attack, guess what we're going to do? We're going to hunt you down. We're going to bring you and your entire family before us, and we're going to execute all of you. While that may seem drastic, it was also very effective, which is why we don't see that happen. But here in our country, you know what? We don't do that. We just don't do it. And again, I'm running out of time. I wanted to touch base really quickly before we head out on, before I talk about the weather for just a moment, I wanted to add a couple of different things. One, Donald Trump is going to have a rally on January 19th in Washington, D.C. Now, I don't know that that's the best place for any of us to be for a lot of different reasons, but just so you know, that is taking place if you are someone who is interested in attending that rally. Second, we had that situation in Virginia where the FBI got involved. They found a home. It was one of the largest cache of explosives they found, 150 pipe bombs. All these pipe bombs were loaded into a vest. I knew that they found these weapons in the Virginia home. I didn't realize until this morning, right before I got on the show, that those pipe bombs were actually already loaded onto a vest. So we have to believe that there was someone in that home who was planning to use that vest to harm Americans. And, we've got this situation with the drones. Could all this be tied together? Are they looking for potential weapons? We've talked about that possibility in the past. Maybe there's something bigger going on with these terror attacks. Maybe this is that time when they've said, hey, you've been waiting, you've been in your sleeper cell all these years. Now is the time. Now it's time to wake up, and we're going to do this. We don't know. That's what's crazy about terrorism. We just don't know. So I want to touch base on that. Outside of that, I'll talk more about this tomorrow. But if you're in not just the St. Louis area, really all across the Midwest, even down a little bit further south, we're seeing some really crazy weather reports. And as scary as terrorism is, quite honestly, a severe weather system like this will lead to more deaths than what we've seen, through terrorism here. Not in our country, but through these recent incidents. And something to be thinking about. When we have a situation, I don't know if you guys remember, I think it was 2009, we had a very similar storm come through where we had a lot of ice, a lot of glazing of trees. You remember that? And in very cold temperatures. And what that caused, and then a little bit of snow on top of that, it caused the trees to snap. It caused power lines to snap. And that very well could happen with this storm that's coming through if it continues on the same trajectory that it is on. Now, we won't know a little bit more. We'll probably know a little bit more tomorrow, a little bit more Saturday. It's supposed to start coming through on Saturday, Sunday, and into Monday. But if we do have a repeat of that storm system, I remember back then, I don't know about you guys, but I didn't have power for 2 weeks. And I was at my home. I had a wooded area behind me, and I could hear the trees snapping, and I heard the power line snap. And it wasn't just me. There was people all over the area, all across the St. Louis area, all across, Metro East, who lost power during that time. And you have to be careful. You have to be prepared, because I'll tell you what, as scary as it is to think, and the reason why I'm bringing this up, it's more than bad roads. You could expect to be home without power, for days to weeks, depending on where you live, if the storm system comes through that they're expecting, and I don't necessarily mean negative 35-degree weather, which is some really extreme models are projecting. I don't expect that to happen. But if we do indeed have the icing that we're expecting to have, and then the snow on top of that, that absolutely could lead to snapped power lines. And if that happens, you want to make sure that you and your home are prepared. And I'm going to talk a lot about that a lot more tomorrow and give you some different ideas. But I myself am getting prepared. I am. I'm going to be working on it today, tomorrow, up until, of course, the storm comes through. And you don't need a generator. A generator is certainly handy if you have one, but you don't need a generator. Think about this, and we'll talk more about it tomorrow. What you need to make sure is that you have a way to stay warm. You have to make sure you have food, and you have to make sure you have water. That doesn't mean raiding the grocery store of bread and milk and eggs. Make sure you have items that don't have to be refrigerated. Make sure that you have sources of warmth. And that can be, there are some propane heaters that are safe to use in the home. If you purchase a propane heater, make sure that it is one that you can safely use indoors. And somebody mentioned the other day when I was talking about this, I'm not sure if it was Allison or someone else, where they said that it's good to have some type of detector, carbon monoxide detector, or something along those lines in your home if you are going to use some type of alternative heat source. Those things are good to have anyway. But you have to have a way to stay warm. One of the things that I've bought a lot of this year are those little heat packs. And gosh, I can't remember what they're called right now, hot something. And they come in the orange bag. And as soon as you open them, as soon as they're exposed to air, they become hot. Well, they will stay warm for hours, and they're very inexpensive. You can buy an entire bag of them for about $7. Let's say at Walmart. Aldi just had some on sale for $5 for a bag. You can buy one of the single individual warmers that's supposed to keep your entire body warm for up to, I think it's 12 hours. It's an adhesive, you stick it to your back, and it'll keep your entire body warm. So those are things to keep think of. Make sure you have plenty of blankets. Make sure you have a way to stay warm. Make sure you have food, and make sure you have water to at least, I would say, last at least 2 to 3 weeks. Because I know from example, I know back in 2007, or was it 2007, 2009? There one year we had a Derico, remember that? And it was in the summertime, and I lost power for a couple weeks. And then the other time I lost power in the winter. I think that was 2009 was the winter storm. But either way, I know what it was like to go for 2 weeks without power in a very, cold setting. So you definitely have to be prepared. And Allison said something about, sorry, my comments had something through it. Allison says some propane heaters have built-in carbon monoxide detection. They do. I was looking at some of those last night because I think I'm going to order them. Margie says, I have beef sticks and hot hands. Hot hands. Thank you, Margie. That's what it is, hot hands. Well, hot hands come in small little cubes, and they also come in a little bit of a larger pad. My son was working on my Jeep last night, and it was so cold out, and he had 2 of the little hot hands. And later on, he came in and had put them down on the table, and then they were still warm like 3 hours later. They're probably still warm now, but I threw them away. And let's see here. Dottie says alternative cooking service, propane griddle. Yeah, that's one thing, it might be cold out, but I have a pellet grill outside. Of course, that's electric. I could probably hook it up to a small generator if I really needed to use it. I do have several propane grills, those road trip grills. I have one of those that runs on canisters of propane. So some of the things I'm doing myself, even though I have a lot of hot hands, I'm going to buy more hot hands because technically, if you have enough of those hot hands, you can warm yourself through a couple of weeks' time. It would work along with blankets and other warm clothing. I am going to make sure I have plenty of water. Now, I have a well system here, but in order to operate the well, I have well water that flush the toilet, strangely enough, and city water for pretty much everything else. And so when the power goes out, a lot of times your water will still work. But for me, the toilets won't because it's connected to the well pump. So, you might have to have a small generator to keep your well pump, of course, going. So those are some of the things on my mind. I'm going to make sure that I have lots of food on hand just in case. I'm going to prepare just in case I have to be home for 2 to 3 weeks without power because it certainly can happen, especially for me. I have a lot of trees, power lines under the trees and so on. Todd says I have no fireplace. Todd, I do have a fireplace, but it is a gas fireplace. It used to be before I moved here, it was a regular fireplace and someone turned it into a gas fireplace. Now I want to turn it back into a regular fireplace, but I haven't yet, so that's not really an option for me. Margie says hot hands also work on an achy back. Yes, they do. Lots of things hot hands work for. So those are some of the things. Please keep an eye on the weather. Please keep an eye on the weather. I'm going to be talking about this a little bit more tomorrow because it is true. Every time we have a severe weather system that comes through like this, lots of lives are lost. And don't think it can't be yours or someone I'm going to ask everyone first, think about your neighbors, in your community. There's a lot of homeless people right now who will never be able to survive this type of weather. And if you're familiar with how homelessness works, a lot there really just are not enough shelters for the people who are living out there. How we help them, I don't know, outside of giving them hot hands, giving them, sleeping bags and other ways to keep warm. And here in the city of St. Louis, Tashara Jones has decided not to bring out warming buses. Now, that might change in this system, but as of right now, she has not used warming buses. So the people who live on the streets really have no alternative to stay warm. So it's a serious situation that's going to lead to a lot of lives lost. And at least the city of St. Louis, elderly people who cannot regulate their temperature well, make sure you keep an eye on the elderly people that reach out to people in your community, think about them first, and then we'll prepare for ourselves. So that's enough of that for today. Oh yeah, Todd, thank you for adding that in. Pipes freeze. That is one of the things that I am personally going to do. I'm going to make sure that all of my sinks are dripping. I have heaters that I'm going to place on areas where pipe might be exposed. I know last year it got really cold out and the pump from the well that runs through my garage that then either runs through the toilets or to the spigots around the house, that froze. And so none of the toilets would flush. And so I learned the hard way that now I have to have a heater in the garage. My garage is not heated. So therefore I have to have a heater in the garage on the pipes that come up from the well and into the house. So those are all things to think about. Think about all the vulnerable areas in your home. I'm going to go buy some bird seed, keep the birds going. I've got chickens to worry about. I don't know if any of you have animals, but I'll tell you what, when the temperatures get extreme, you also have to think about your pets and, other animals in the area. Anyway, I could go on all day about all of this, but we will talk about it again tomorrow. Dottie says, order Safrats tablets for your bottled water. Dottie, I don't even know what that is. You'll have to fill me in on that. I have no idea what that is. And I will look that up. But either way, that's it for me today. We have a lot more to talk about tomorrow. We're going to get some updates again on the terror situation that's taking place. Hopefully nothing additional happens between now. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about this stormy weather as it gets a little bit closer to where we have a better idea of what's going on. Lots of other news to talk about that I didn't focus on today because obviously there's more impending issues, at hand. But either way, thank you guys all for joining me today. I thank you for your support. I'm Tabitha Hassell with Tabs on Tap, and I do hope to talk to you all, see you all tomorrow morning. Have a great night, everyone.